Maybe you clicked out of curiosity, or maybe, without realizing it, you were looking for a quieter place where words take their time, and silence is part of the story too. I wrote this piece gently, like stitching together memories, hurt, and moments of clarity, in hopes that somewhere in it you might see a small part of yourself. If that happens, even for just a moment, stay. Listen as long as you need. And if it touches you, leave a small sign, a comment, a like, a quiet, "I'm here." Sometimes that's more than enough. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome to subscribe. I don't usually post stuff like this, but I need to get it out somewhere. Maybe someone will understand, maybe someone's been through it. Or maybe I'm just losing my mind. Last Friday started like any other. My wife Sarah was prepping lunch. I was answering emails on the back porch. Our 6-year-old daughter Ellie was playing in the backyard, wearing her little red hoodie and plastic sunglasses even though it was cloudy. She called them her spy glasses. We live in a quiet suburb in Connecticut. Fenced yard, security cams. It's not the kind of place where you worry too much. Ellie was bouncing her soccer ball. I glanced over at her maybe 10 minutes before it happened. When I looked again, the ball was rolling near the fence. But no Ellie. At first, I figured she'd wandered behind the shed or maybe into the garage. But I called her name. No answer. I checked the gate. It was unlatched, open about a foot. That gate's got a latch that sticks. You have to pull it hard to open from the outside. There's no way a 6-year-old could have opened it on her own, and we keep it locked. I ran to the front yard. Nothing. No footprints, no tire marks. I screamed her name until my throat burned. Sarah came out, saw my face, and collapsed before I even said the words. Cops came within minutes. We live in a small enough town that people still care. We triggered an Amber Alert by sundown. Detectives reviewed our home cameras first. Nothing useful. The one facing the gate had glitched out for exactly 16 minutes. 16 freaking minutes. No footage, no explanation. The police didn't find forced entry. No signs of a struggle. No unusual cars reported in the area. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. But that night, something else happened. Something that still sends a chill down my spine. My mom was staying with us that weekend. She's been living in a retirement condo 2 towns over, but likes to visit Ellie. She was the one who taught her how to bake banana bread and fold paper swans. After the cops left and things finally went quiet, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the backyard through the glass door. She was pale, her tea untouched, her hands clenched like claws. I asked her gently, "You okay?" She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, almost like she was scared to hear herself say it, "That gate. It looks exactly like the one I saw in my dreams. The summer I turned 8, with a girl standing behind it, crying." I froze, because I'd never told her that the gate had been open. I don't know what any of this means yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe it's just trauma talking. But something about the way she said it, like it wasn't a dream at all, made my stomach twist in a way I can't shake. And deep down, some part of me wonders, what the hell happened to my mother when she was 8? There's this weird thing that happens when your kid goes missing. Every normal part of life feels fake. Eating, sleeping, working. Like you're living inside a paper version of your world, and any second, it's going to tear. But my mom's words that night, they wouldn't leave me alone. That gate looks like the one from my dreams. A dream from when she was 8. It didn't sound like a dream. It sounded like a memory. I've never known much about my mom's childhood. Her name is Lily Carson. Or at least, that's the name she's always used. No siblings, no parents I've ever met. She told me she was raised by her father, Richard Carson, a quiet widowed man who died when I was 5. I barely remember him. She never showed me pictures of herself as a kid. Said most of their stuff was lost in a house fire back in the 80s. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But after Ellie vanished, I started noticing cracks in the story. Little things I'd ignored before. For starters, my mom doesn't have a birth certificate. Not in Connecticut, not in New York, where she says she was born. I used to joke that she was off the grid before it was cool. But now it just felt wrong. So I started digging. I filed a request with Vital Records in 3 different states. No matches, no school records either. Not until she was around 13, when she showed up enrolled in a small charter school under the name Lily Carson. Before that, nothing. It was like she appeared out of nowhere. Out of desperation, I signed us both up for an online DNA database. One of those services people use to find long-lost cousins or build family trees. Took about 2 weeks. I'd honestly forgotten I'd even done it by the time the results came in. But when I logged in and opened her profile, there was a blinking notification. Immediate family match found. I clicked. Potential mother, Martha Carson, deceased. Potential father, Daniel Carson, deceased. Match. Confidence, 99.9%, missing person file, linked. Anna Carson, age 7, reported missing July 2, 1978, Albany, New York. My heart stopped. Anna, not Lily, born 1971, reported missing by her parents in 78. Last seen playing in her front yard while her dad mowed the lawn. I looked up the missing persons report. There was a black and white photo of a little girl with blunt bangs and sad eyes. Even in grainy resolution, I could see it. That was my mother. I didn't tell her right away. Honestly, I didn't know how. How do you say, hey, your whole identity might be a lie, and the man who raised you might have been the one who kidnapped you? But I couldn't sit with it either. So I printed the report. The photo, the DNA match. I handed them to her 2 days later. She stared for a long time. Quiet, frozen. Then she whispered, almost too soft to hear. I remember that dress. I remember crying when I lost the bow. That was it. That was the first time I saw my mother break. That night, she told me something she'd never said before. That when she was a kid, she used to have dreams about another mom. One with freckles and a soft voice. She'd always believed those were just stories her brain made up to cope with being adopted late. But now she wasn't so sure. My mom is Anna Carson. She disappeared in 1978, and somehow she ended up being raised by the man we called Grandpa, a man we buried 10 years ago, a man who might not even be dead. Because if he was capable of stealing a child once, what's to stop him from doing it again? I thought finding out my mom had been kidnapped as a child would crack something open, some long-sealed vault of truth, some flood of memories, even just a moment of clarity. It didn't. When I showed her the DNA report, the missing person file, the picture of little Anna Carson in the polka dot dress, she didn't scream or collapse. She just stared at it for a long time, then muttered, "He saved me." That's all I know. I asked, "From what?" She stood up, eyes glazed. "From people who didn't want me, from a world that would have broken me. He gave me structure, purpose, that's enough." Then she walked upstairs and slammed her bedroom door like a teenager. I hadn't seen her like that since I was 15, and told her I didn't believe in God anymore. The thing is, my mom isn't crazy. She's sharp, she's practical. She doesn't buy into conspiracy crap, doesn't hoard canned food, doesn't think aliens live under Walmart. She volunteers at a senior shelter and reads mystery novels. But when it comes to Grandpa Richard, she talks like she's been programmed, like someone installed a firewall in her memory, and any time I get too close, it triggers a shutdown. So I decided to learn more about him. I started where any normal American does, Google. It was mostly basic obituary stuff. Richard Carson, retired carpenter, Vietnam vet, volunteer at St. Matthew's Church. died 2012 from heart failure. But then I found it. A newspaper article from 1981, clipped from a tiny local paper in upstate New York. Local hero honored for rescuing child from alleged abusive orphanage. Mr. Carson said he discovered 10-year-old Lily in a neglected facility during a volunteer visit, and after reporting to authorities, was granted emergency guardianship. It even had a photo, my mom, maybe 10, standing next to him, holding a teddy bear with a forced smile. Only one problem. There was no such orphanage, not in that town, not in any state records, not even in archives of shuttered facilities. I checked. I called. I even reached out to a retired social worker who used to handle cases in that area. She said bluntly, that story never made sense, but he had the paperwork, and the girl didn't have anyone else, so the judge signed off. We didn't have DNA back then, just a signature and a story. That made me sick to my stomach. This man, this guy I used to call Grandpa, faked a rescue, got guardianship of a kidnapped child, and no one questioned it because he wore a cross around his neck and said all the right things. He didn't hide her in the basement. He dressed her in clean clothes, sent her to school under a fake name, told everyone she was his late cousin's daughter. He played the long game, and it worked. I tried to bring it up again with my mom the next night. I thought maybe now, with proof that the orphanage never existed, she'd crack. Instead, she snapped. She stood in the middle of our kitchen, shaking, and shouted, "I told you to leave it alone! He took care of me! I don't care what your papers say! I don't need the Carsons! I was unwanted, and he made me feel like someone mattered!" It wasn't anger in her voice. It was panic. Like if she let herself believe the truth, her whole identity would collapse. Like she'd been a hostage so long, she'd forgotten what freedom even looked like. I backed off. For now. But I started looking deeper into the missing person file. The case had been marked closed by lack of credible suspect sometime in the 90s, after decades of dead ends. No fingerprints, no witness, no leads. But now I had a suspect. And if Richard Carson was capable of pulling that off once, fabricating identities, deceiving authorities, raising a child under false pretenses, then what if he didn't die in 2012? What if the man we buried wasn't him? What if the man who raised my mother just stole my daughter to start the cycle again? After that last fight with my mom, I knew I had to dig without her help. She was too deep in it, too conditioned. So I drove to her old house, the one she inherited from Richard, my grandfather. It had been sitting vacant for years after she moved into a condo, just collecting dust and property tax. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same leaning mailbox, same rusted swing set in the backyard. The house felt frozen in time, like it had been waiting for me. I started in the basement. That's where he always kept his records. Taxes, military discharge, church paperwork. He was weirdly organized, borderline obsessive. Everything was labeled in plastic bins. I went through 6 boxes before I found it. A red leather binder tucked between old AA meeting pamphlets and a dog-eared Bible. Inside were handwritten logs, labeled simply, Lily, dosage adjustments, behavior notes, 1981 to 1989. The first entry was when she was 10, the last, her 18th birthday. Each page had the same structure. Date medication, mostly tranquilizers, beta blockers, occasional antipsychotics. Behavior, compliant, defiant, weepy, quiet all day. Response, increased dose, restricted outdoor time, removed from music class. It wasn't medical, it wasn't therapy, it was control. He kept her drugged for years. Not enough to knock her out, but enough to dull her edges, to keep her manageable. I flipped to the back. There were charts, dosage cycles, mood tracking, sleep logs. This wasn't just a kidnapper. This was someone designing a personality. Then I found the drawings, tucked behind the binder, in a manila envelope marked Reflections. Crayon sketches. Dozens of them, all in a child's hand. But they weren't of my mom. They were of other little girls. Each drawing had a name scrawled on the back. Some repeated, some crossed out. All girls. All with long hair. All around 6 or 7 years old. All with that same vacant smile. And in the bottom corner of each one, a fake school seal. Red Elm Academy for Gifted Girls. Spoiler, it doesn't exist. I checked. There's no such place registered in any state. Some of the drawings had evaluation marks on them. Too loud. Too thin. Hair wrong shade. Keep watching. Possible match. That's when it hit me. These weren't just drawings. They were profiles, targets. He wasn't improvising. He wasn't some broken man acting out trauma. He was methodical. He was patient. And he was practicing. My mom wasn't a one-time crime. She was a prototype. That night, I sat in my car for hours with those files in my lap, just shaking. I couldn't bring myself to go home, to look Sarah in the eye, to tell her that this wasn't some tragic fluke. This was a system. And if Ellie matched one of those profiles, then she wasn't just missing. She was being molded, rewritten, replaced. That's when I noticed something else. Taped to the back of the binder. A utility bill. Paid 2 weeks ago. Addressed to a name I didn't recognize, in a town I'd never heard of. Greystone, Vermont. He was dead. That's what we all thought. But someone was still paying his bills. Still living under his rules. Still running the loop. And maybe, just maybe, he was still alive. And doing it again. The call came at 2:14 a.m. I was in the garage, still trying to map out every address and alias tied to that utility bill from Vermont. The house was dark. Sarah had finally fallen asleep with a blanket wrapped around her on the couch. My mom was upstairs, locked in silence. My phone buzzed. Unknown caller. Normally, I'd ignore it. But something in my gut said, pick it up. Hello? Silence, then, Michael? It wasn't a question, just my name. Spoken softly, slowly, almost reverently. Who is this? I asked, sitting up straight. Another pause. Then the voice returned, quieter, lower. I have your daughter. She's safe. She's well cared for. But if you keep digging, if you keep chasing ghosts, you're going to get her hurt. Or worse. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. Where is she? Put her on. I swear to God. You should be thanking me. The voice interrupted. She's being shaped into something better. Just like your mother was. Don't ruin her like they tried to ruin you. The call ended. No click. Just gone. I stood there, phone in hand, frozen. The voice, it didn't sound exactly like Richard, my grandfather. It was older, shakier. But the cadence, the rhythm, it was him. Or someone mimicking him so well it made my skin crawl. I called the number back, disconnected. I contacted the police, forwarded the number and timestamp, but I could already tell they wouldn't get far. Spoofed, masked, maybe rerouted through a burner app. They said they'd follow protocol, but I wasn't waiting on protocol. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. Richard Carson was buried in St. Jude's Memorial Garden. Small, private, quiet. I hadn't been back since the funeral. My mom didn't like to talk about it, and to be honest, I never liked being around that grave. Something about it always felt unfinished. I parked just outside the gate. Fog rolled low over the grass, and when I turned the corner toward his headstone, I stopped cold. The ground in front of his grave was disturbed. Fresh dirt, a shallow indentation, no flowers, no sod, just the shape of something recently tampered with. I walked closer. The stone read exactly the same. Richard W. Carson, 1944 to 2012. He kept the faith, but the earth beneath it had clearly been dug up. I checked with the groundskeeper. You sure no one's done maintenance here in the past few weeks? He frowned. No, sir. Nobody touches graves once they're laid down. Not unless there's an exhumation order, and that goes through the county. Why? I didn't answer, because I already knew that casket was never opened before burial. I remember the funeral. It was closed casket, said to be too emotional for the family. But what if it wasn't emotion? What if there was never a body? I drove straight to the clerk's office. It took an hour of red tape, but I got a copy of the burial certificate. It had the right dates, right plot, same funeral home, but something felt off. So I called the funeral director listed on the paperwork. Dead. 3 years ago. No digital records from that time. Back home, I opened an old VHS from the funeral. My mom had recorded it, though she never watched it. The camera was shaky, pointed mostly at the grass and shoes. But as they wheeled the casket out of the chapel, I saw it. No one looked inside. Not the pastor, not the family, not even the cemetery staff. The casket went from hearse to whole. No confirmation, no identification. So now I'm asking myself the question no one wants to ask. Did Richard Carson fake his own death? Because if he did, he's had 10 years to plan what he's doing now. And he has my daughter. The address on the utility bill was deep in the woods outside Greystone, Vermont, a town so small it doesn't even have a Starbucks, just a diner, a gas station, and a post office that closes at 3 p.m. It took me 5 hours to get there. I didn't tell Sarah I was going. I didn't tell my mom either. I didn't want to explain why I was driving across state lines to a cabin I wasn't even sure existed. But I had the address, and a gut feeling I couldn't shake. The dirt road was half covered in leaves. GPS cut out 3 miles in. I parked at a rusted gate with a padlock that had been recently broken. Someone had been here and wanted back in. I hiked the rest of the way. The trees were thick, the kind that swallow sound. No bird song, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and my heart pounding in my ears. Then I saw it. A 2-story cabin, half hidden behind overgrown brush. The paint was peeling, windows were boarded from the outside, but it wasn't abandoned. There were fresh tire tracks in the mud. I circled the house first. No sign of people, no dog, no smoke. But the power meter was spinning. I jimmied open the back door with a crowbar I'd brought, my hands shaking, mouth dry. I had no plan, just desperation. The inside smelled like antiseptic and old wood. What struck me first was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind you only get when a place is engineered to be quiet. Thick curtains. No clocks, no radios, just still. There were cameras mounted in the corners. Not the modern kind, but those creepy camcorder setups from the 90s, plugged into a central console in the living room. The walls were lined with old wallpaper, flowers, clouds, the kind you'd see in a little girl's room. Every detail felt curated, like someone had tried to rebuild a memory from scratch. And then I saw it. A small bed, pink sheets, a plush unicorn lying on top. It was Ellie's. More than that, it was Ellie's favorite, a unicorn with a torn ear that she refused to let us fix because she said, "He's brave that way." No one could have faked that. On the shelf next to the bed, I found a photo, printed from an old film roll, grainy but clear. My daughter, Ellie, sitting on a bench, and beside her, Richard Carson, older, thinner, beard grown out, but definitely him. He was smiling, and she looked calm, blank almost, like she didn't recognize the situation as wrong, like this man had convinced her they were family. I sat on the edge of the bed and nearly threw up. He was doing it again, rebuilding the scenario, just like he did with my mother. The same bed, the same remote house, the same programming, only this time he had a decade more experience. I kept searching. In the kitchen, I found fresh groceries, eggs, milk, a box of Ellie's favorite cereal. Receipts dated 3 days ago from a local market, paid in cash. The fridge was clean, labeled, Meal plans on the wall. Downstairs, there was a basement door. Locked. Heavy. I didn't have the tools. Not yet. But I knew what was behind it. Or worse, who. I left the house before nightfall. I took the photo. The stuffed unicorn. One of the receipts. Back in town, I filed a police report and requested a search warrant. Vermont State Police took it seriously. Once I handed over the photo, they escalated it as a potential abduction site. But I didn't wait for red tape. Because if he'd kept my mom hidden for 10 years, he wouldn't risk keeping Ellie in one place for long. I had maybe 48 hours before he disappeared again. And this time, he knew I was close. When I got back from Vermont, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed up in the kitchen, lights off, photo of Richard and Ellie on the table in front of me. That picture felt like a punch to the soul. It confirmed every nightmare I didn't want to believe. I waited until sunrise to talk to my mom. She came down the stairs slowly, like she already knew what was waiting. She looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes sunken, like the years had finally caught up to her in a single night. I slid the photo toward her. She didn't even touch it, just stared. Her hands began to tremble. "He's alive," I said. "And he has Ellie." No response, just that 1,000-yard stare. So I kept going. I showed her the unicorn from the cabin, the meal plans, the medication logs from the basement, the drawings, the fake school seal. I laid it all out, all of it. After what felt like forever, she whispered, "I hoped I was wrong." But I felt it. The moment she disappeared, I knew. She finally picked up the photo, held it like it might burn her, and then, quietly, "He said if I ever told anyone, ever tried to run, he'd take the next child in the bloodline. He said the cycle would stay in the family." I didn't think he meant it literally. I thought it was just his way of keeping me quiet. She broke then, dropped the photo, covered her face with both hands. The kind of crying that doesn't make noise, just shakes your entire body like something came unglued. And I realized she'd been living with that fear for over 30 years. That the man who raised her wasn't just abusive or controlling. He was calculated. He used fear like a scalpel. And she'd learned to bury it so deep, she convinced herself it wasn't even real anymore. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, not out of anger, just disbelief. She looked at me, her voice hoarse. "Because I thought it was over. Because I thought if I was a good mother, he'd leave you alone. And when Ellie was born, I begged God every night to let it be enough." She looked away. But deep down, I always knew I wasn't the only one. I was just the first. In that moment, everything changed. All the years of silence, all the weird gaps in her story, all the half-truths and nervous laughter, it all made sense now. My mother wasn't just a woman with a traumatic childhood. She was the survivor of a design. And now her granddaughter was caught in the same design. We sat in silence until my mom finally said, "He used to say, 'Little girls are most beautiful before the world ruins them.' He believed it was his job to protect us, from the world, from ourselves, from growing up." She looked at me, really looked at me. "He didn't raise me to be his daughter, Michael. He raised me to be his perfect child, forever." That's when she stood up. "We're not waiting for the police," she said, eyes hard now. "We end this ourselves." I thought I was ready to see him again. 10 years dead, 30 years feared, a lifetime of manipulation burned into the DNA of our family. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for opening that basement door and seeing Richard Carson alive, waiting for us. The air was cold, dry, like a medical storage unit. He was sitting in a leather armchair in the center of the basement under a spotlight. His hair white, beard long, sweater neatly folded at the sleeves. Not startled, not defensive, just waiting, like he knew we were coming. Ellie was across the room in a makeshift bedroom setup, pastel wallpaper, fairy lights, and a canopy bed too small for her height. She looked sedated, awake but sluggish. Her eyes didn't track me right away. There were cameras on every wall. I saw monitors lining one corner, paused frames of Ellie brushing her hair, reading a picture book, coloring. He'd been watching her like a science project. "You shouldn't be here, Michael," he said calmly. "She's not ready yet." I stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're done. It's over. Step away from her." He didn't move, just tilted his head like a disappointed teacher. The world ruins little girls, fills them with lies, with chaos. I built a better one, just like I did for Anna. I couldn't take it. I lunged, shoved the chair hard enough that he hit the floor, wheezing. He was weaker than I remembered, but still twisted enough to smile through bloodied lips. "You think violence makes you a father?" That's when I heard her voice, from behind me, sharp, steady, unfamiliar and yet completely hers. Number but speaking does. I turned. My mother was standing at the stairs. She walked down slowly, carefully. Her eyes didn't leave him once. He tried to speak, but this time, she didn't let him. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to say my name. You don't get to explain, or justify, or twist it into some broken fairy tale." He pushed himself upright, leaning against a table. "Anna." "Don't!" she snapped. Then louder, firmer than I've ever heard. "I'm not Anna. I haven't been her since the day you drugged me and called it love." The silence in the room was thick. Even the monitors felt like they were holding their breath. She walked over to Ellie, crouched beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "You didn't protect me. You broke me. And now you're trying to do the same thing to her." He started to move toward them, but I stepped between. "One more step, and I swear to God." His hands went up, not in surrender, in pride. "You both turned out better than I imagined." I wanted to hit him, end it. But then I remembered something the detective said. If you want this to stick, get him alive, get him coherent, get him documented. So I pulled out my phone, started recording. "Tell me why you did it," I said. "To preserve them," he replied, like it was the most obvious answer in the world. "To keep them safe from a culture that chews girls up and spits out something hollow." He gestured to the room. "This is peace, order, control, not the chaos of the outside. Out there, they become something else. In here, they stay pure." That was all we needed. Police arrived 12 minutes later, tipped off by the silent ping I'd activated on my phone before entering. State troopers came in with guns drawn. He didn't resist, just smiled as they cuffed him. "She's almost ready," he muttered as they led him out. We never asked what he meant. We didn't want to know. Ellie was taken to the hospital that night. She's okay now, physically, still processing, still quiet. But when she saw her mom again, she clung to her so tightly we all broke down. As for my mother, she didn't cry. She held Ellie's hand and whispered, "It ends with me. You're going to grow up, and you're going to be you." The morning after Richard's arrest, our story was everywhere. Local news, regional papers, and by noon, national outlets had picked it up. They plastered his old obituary next to a current mugshot. Same eyes, same smug tilt of the chin. Decorated war veteran arrested in child abduction case. Man who once received Community Hero Award accused of kidnapping and psychological abuse. Reclusive Connecticut grandfather kept daughter captive for 10 years, then took granddaughter. People were stunned, outraged, disbelieving. He wasn't supposed to be a monster. He was supposed to be a model citizen. The kind of man you invite to speak at the Rotary Club. But evil doesn't always look like a shadow under the bed. Sometimes it wears a sweater and smiles for church photos. My mom was quiet for 2 days. Then she asked me to drive her to the police station. She sat down with 2 detectives, asked for a recorder, and told them everything. From the day Richard picked her up at age 7, promising a better life, to the fake orphanage story, the medication logs, the schooling, the lies. She told them about the fear conditioning, the verbal punishments, the emotional freeze-out tactics when she resisted. She told them how he convinced her that the outside world was dangerous, and he was her only shield. It was the first time she'd ever used the word captivity. After her statement, a detective handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter from a lawyer representing Daniel and Martha Carson, her biological parents. They had seen the news, and they still lived in Albany, New York. They'd never stopped wondering. They'd kept her room. They'd never changed their phone number. They'd kept her photo in every Christmas card since 1978. We drove up that weekend. I won't lie, part of me worried she'd panic. That standing face-to-face with a past she'd been forced to forget would break her. But when the front door opened and Martha Carson stepped out, trembling, with white hair and wide eyes, my mother didn't freeze. She walked forward and whispered, "I'm sorry I forgot you." Then she collapsed into Martha's arms like a daughter coming home after school. Daniel came out and wrapped them both in shaking arms. It was one of the few times in my life I cried without even realizing I was crying. As for Ellie, she's healing. She's back home now, going to therapy twice a week. She sleeps with a light on, still won't talk much about the princess room in Vermont, but she's safe. She laughs again, even if it's not quite the same. She asks about her grandma Anna, and my mom always answers her now, not with fear, but with honesty. I, on the other hand, filed a civil suit, not for money, but for accountability. I sued the county where Richard got his fraudulent guardianship approved. I sued the school board that never followed up on a child with 0 background records. I sued the Department of Children and Families for never investigating the orphanage that never existed. Some people say it's pointless, but I want that paper trail. Because someday Ellie will grow up and ask, "How did this happen?" And I want to be able to say, "It happened once, and we made sure it won't happen again." A year after the arrest, I stood in front of the house where it all started. Not the one in Vermont, the other one. The house in Connecticut. The one where my mom was raised. The one where Richard wrote behavior logs in a red binder, while the neighborhood thought he was just a quiet widower with a garden and good manners. We gutted the place, tore out the wallpaper, ripped up the floors, took every rusted nail out of the walls, and we rebuilt it from the inside out. It's now called Anna's Voice, a non-profit center for survivors of family-based abuse and coercive control. A place where women and men can come to remember, to process, to reclaim. We host therapy sessions, creative recovery groups, education for professionals who failed to see the signs. There's a rule here. No locks on any inside doors, no hidden cameras, no supervised silence, just choice and light and words. My mom was the first person to speak on opening night. She stood at a podium under the porch light, wearing a denim jacket and her favorite beaded bracelet Ellie made her. She looked out at the crowd, survivors, press, neighbors who once brought her casseroles without ever asking what was really going on, and said, "I was raised to stay small, to be quiet, to believe that control was love, but silence doesn't keep anyone safe, and love, real love, doesn't need locks." Ellie sat beside me during the speech. She had a drawing in her lap. When we got home that night, she showed it to me. "This is my real room," she said. "The one in my head." It was bright. Yellow walls, big window, a bookshelf with animals instead of cameras, and a bed with no canopy. At the bottom, she'd written, "No rules, just safe." I taped it to the fridge. There are still days I wake up in cold sweat, Days when Ellie hides under the covers at the sound of the doorbell. Days when my mom stares at her coffee, and I know she's back in that basement in her mind. But we talk, we process, we don't stay silent anymore. Richard Carson died in federal custody 6 months after trial began. Heart failure. No final words, no confessions, just silence. And for once, we welcomed it. I look at my daughter now and realize I didn't save her. She saved us. Because if she hadn't disappeared, we might never have found the truth. We might never have broken the cycle. We might never have healed. I once thought trauma was a straight line. But it's a loop. Until someone says, no more. Until someone steps through the gate and closes it behind them.